as we head into the final three races to decide the Radical European Masters title for 2016. It's three 60-minute races around the former home of the Spanish Grand Prix to look forward to, and you join myself, Ben Evans, on an absolutely beautiful day in Jerez. The sun is beating down, the temperature has been steadily climbing throughout the afternoon, and that means it's going to be a very busy hour's work for the drivers. The field forming up now, and here is our pole sitter James Littlejohn, who alongside Tony Wells comes into the weekend leading the Masters Class Championship by 29 points over Manhalas and Alex Kapadia. And it is Alex Kapadia who starts alongside them on the front row of the grid. Congratulations, by the way, to Alex and his wife Jenna on the birth of their little boy Leo, which happened a couple of days after the Monza event, which Alex missed with good reason. Third on the grid is Paddy McLuhan, who returns to the series this weekend alongside John Harrison. McLuhan, a very quick former Ginetta Juniors driver, amongst other things. Fourth on the grid is a very special entry in the form of Chris Hoy, sharing the car with his fellow Olympic cycling legend Jason Kenny. And so they line up in fourth. Hoy, the more experienced racer of the pair, although for neither this is anything like their race debut. Fifth on the grid is our leading Supersport class runner, and that is Marco Cencetti and Marcello Maratiotto, and they lead the Supersport class championship, and in fact the overall championship coming into the weekend. But with 40 points on offer, there is absolutely everything to race for. Sixth on the grid then for Stuart Mosley in the car that he shares with Ricardo Dona. Double thumbs up from Mosley. Second in the Supersport Championship. A good weekend for him, and Dona might overhaul Maratiotto and Cencetti. Seventh on the grid then for James Robinson in the car that he shares with Jack Manchester. It's another of the Supersport entries. And then lining up in eighth place is the very experienced former star of the BARC Formula Renault Championship, amongst other things, Ollie Hancock, and he will be sharing that car with Mark Hignett over the course of the next couple of days. Lining up in ninth place, it is the Australian driver in the Monza Garage Masters Class Spider car, and Corbett, who is often a front runner, could be one to watch, as will Theodore Olsen, making his debut in the Radical European Masters this weekend, the Scandinavian Radical Championship, and he shares the car with Jamie Constable. Then on to the sixth row of the grid, it is Brian Caldwell, who lines up in 11th place. Caldwell, one of several drivers in the field who's come up through the Radical Motorsports ladder, having started in the SR1 Cup, and he shares the row with John Caldwell. And again, big thumbs up from John, really enjoying his racing this weekend and the challenge of the Jerez circuit. The American driver Jim Booth starts in 13th, but don't let the relatively lowly grid position deceive you, because the American has been steadily carving through the field in every race this year and is third in the Masters Championship standings. So here's the run in full then. Littlejohn and Kapadia on the front row from McLuhan and Hoy, row 2. Then Marco Cencetti and Stuart Mosley on the third row from James Robinson and Ollie Hancock. John Corbett and Theodore Olsen completing the fifth row, clear of Brian and John Caldwell. Moving back down through the field, then it's Jim Booth ahead of Andrew Ferguson with Mark Crader to complete the grid. So it's a 60-minute race. There is a mandatory pit stop that comes between 25 and 35 minutes of the race distance. There are the two classes that we alluded to as we went down through the grid. The Masters class, which is for the Radical SR8 and Radical RSX Spider, and those are the cars that we'll look to see to challenge for the race victory. And then the Supersport class, which is for the Radical SR3 RSX. The SR3 is incredibly quick through the corners, but not quite as quick on the straights. But here in Jerez, where there aren't really any lengthy straights to speak of, there is much more parity between the classes. It's a rolling start, and the cars about to set off on their way now. So it's the blue and white car of James Littlejohn who lines up in pole position. He and Tony Wells were plagued by all sorts of mechanical issues last time out in Monza, and the team have been working flat out, changing pretty much every component on the car to make sure that it runs cleanly this weekend, because they lead Manhal Alex Kapadia by 29 points in the Masters Class Championship battle, but there are 40 points available for the race victory, and then it drops to 35 points for second place, 30 points for third. So Wells and Littlejohn, they could claim the title by finishing immediately behind Alison Kapadia all weekend, but they need to stay out of any sort of mechanical bother. The other thing to bear in mind over the course of the 3 races this weekend is the way that performance is levelled through the season is the success seconds that get added to the mandatory minimum pit stop time. So when we do get to the pit stops, the Masters class cars must be stationary for 60 seconds, and that's because they'll refuel. The Supersport class cars are stationary for 45 seconds, and then they get success seconds added to their time. So for Wells and Littlejohn, they've got an additional 15 seconds in the pits. For Alison Kapadia, it is an additional 20 seconds. For Hoy and Kenny, there's Chris Hoy in the number 11 Spider. Well, it is no additional success seconds, and so we could be looking at a podium for the pair of them this afternoon. Chris Hoy, who scored his first ever outright race podium in a Radical European Masters race. That was last summer on a very, very hot day at the Red Bull Ring. And there is Jason Kenny, maybe absorbing a little bit of last-minute advice from Manhal Alos. Alos be watching the progress of Alex Kapadia nervously. The other driver to watch for when we do get going is Paddy McGluen in the bright orange 52 car. Now the difference between the SR8s and the Spiders is that the SR8 is a almost slightly violent car. It's very, very quick in a straight line. You can ask a little bit through the corners. The Spider, with which Chris Hoy is equipped, is a car that's much more gentle and forgiving, monstrously fast in a straight line, but also a car that, if you can find the sweet spot with the setup, can really reward you on some of these more technical circuits. The car made its debut 18 months ago here in the opening round of the 2015 Radical European Masters Series. So the field coming towards the end of their formation lap behind the pace car, which is maybe not quite as spectacular as the Radicals that are formed up behind it. And then they'll get into the side-by-side formation, getting ready for the start of this 60-minute race. Stuart Mosley, second, as we said, in the Supersport Championship, behind Marco Cencetti. 37 points is that differential. In the overall standings, it is Marco Cencetti and Marcello Maratiotto who lead on 540 points. So those are the various dynamics to watch for over the course of the next 60 minutes or so. Thank you very much for joining us here in Jerez this afternoon as they bunch up now behind the pace car, getting ready for the start of the race. Waiting for the very last moment for the pace car to peel off out of the way, making sure they bunch the field. Then it will be the responsibility of James Littlejohn to pace the pack as they head around the final turn. The pace car peels off. We wait for the lights to change. Who'll get the jump as they race towards turn 1? And away we go now. And it's a good start from Paddy McGluen. It's a very good start from Alex Kapadia. And Kapadia tries to squeeze Littlejohn as they head uphill towards the first turn. Also well away is John Corbett. Has contact behind it. It's Stuart Mosley who gets caught up and spins around. Disappointment for Mosley as it's Littlejohn from Kapadia, then Chris Hoy in third. McGluen's dropped down to fourth. John Corbett's up into fifth. Marco Cencetti leads the Supersport class in sixth, just clear of Jamie Robinson. I should add, the former 250cc motorbike racer. And then Jim Booth, told you make a good start. He's up into seventh. Also making good ground early on is Theodore Olsen. He elbows aside Andrew Ferguson as they swing through turn 5, down the back straight for the first time, as McGluen looks like the move on Chris Hoy. And indeed he's through, so Hoy drops down to fourth. Corbett's there in fifth. Also launching to the inside, that is Brian Caldwell, trying to pick his way past Mark Crader. Unfortunately, problems at the end of the formation lap for Brian Caldwell. He's in the pits as James Littlejohn tries to stretch away at the front field. That's Cardi. Then Paddy McLuhan. Then a solid fourth for Chris Hoy. Fifth is John Corbett. He's got Chenchetti snapping at his heels. Theodore Olsen has got Ollie Hancock and Mark Crader tucked up behind him. And this is going to be one of the dynamics to watch for, is that in a straight line, the Spiders have got the legs on the Supersport class cars through the corners. It's a different story as Olsen elbows Ferguson out of the way. Hancock looks to follow through at the chicane. Chenchetti tries to chase John Corbett. They're in pursuit of the green and black car of Chris Hoy. Hoy should have the legs to keep Corbett behind him as they run along the start and finish straight. Meanwhile, Andrew Ferguson reclaims the place on Ollie Hancock as they complete the first lap into first corner. Now here is a replay of that move from Theodore Olsen, launching to the inside of Andrew Ferguson. Not a huge amount that Ferguson could really do to defend that. Ollie Hancock was hoping the door would remain open. It didn't. Now there is John Corbett in fifth position for the Australian. Trying to chase Chris Hoy. It's Chris Hoy, of course, who raced in the Le Mans 24 Hours this year, but actually made his motorsport debut at the wheel of a Radical. He competed in the Radical SR1 Cup going back a couple of seasons ago before making the step onto the European Le Mans Series and Le Mans 24 Hours. And you might have seen the absolutely fantastic BBC documentary with Chris Hoy talking about his motorsport passion, and Colin McRae a few years ago, and then also the Road to Le Mans documentary that was on a couple of weeks ago. And despite his on-track Olympic cycling successes, Hoy, very, very keen motorsport competitor. So his immediate target is Paddy McLuhan. Now, the trick here with the Spider that we've seen all year long is that it's a car you've got to be gentle with in the early stages, because otherwise you just risk munching the tyres a little bit. McLuhan, car that he shares with John Harrison, in a solid third. Now here is the leading battle and the Masters Class Championship fight between James Littlejohn and Alex Kapadia. There's very little to choose between Littlejohn and Kapadia in terms of outright pace, and then Alex Kapadia passes over to Manhal Alos, James Littlejohn to Tony Wells, both of whom are stalwart Radical competitors, and you'd suggest on his day Manhal has maybe got the edge by a couple of tenths of a second a lap over Tony, but there's not an awful lot in it. And so Littlejohn, knowing that he's got success seconds in his favour, wants to give Tony Wells as big a buffer as possible to inherit. So that's why he's trying to stretch his lead over Alex Kapadia. Both these drivers, alongside their successes in Radicals, well known for various other categories of racing. Alex Kapadia, of course, finished the 2015 Le Mans 24 Hours. James Littlejohn has raced regularly in the European Le Mans Series. As Kapadia just gets the car working very nicely, sliding his way out the first of the left-handers. Then it's into the sequence of right-handers that begins to fire them back towards the pits complex. First of all, they've got to navigate the chicane. It was installed, of course, after the accident that befell Martin Donnelly in practice for the 1990 Spanish Grand Prix, which slows them down a little bit before they run on towards the hairpin that brings a lap to the close. Managing the tyres is going to be a real factor for this race. So is driver fatigue, particularly across the course of the weekend, as Chenchetti looks to try and line up the move on John Corbett, but Corbett in a straight line has got just enough to keep Chenchetti behind him. And as Marco Cenchetti's outright lap time is somewhat thwarted by the Spider, it's allowing Jamie Robinson, there he is in the white car, to stick with them now. A big puff of smoke as they come along the start and finish straight. And has somebody either locked their brakes and it's lingering, or have we possibly got a little bit of trouble? Well, if there's any trouble, it's not for Hoy, it's not for Corbett. So it's just maybe a snatch break for one of Kapadia and Littlejohn as Chenchetti tries to line up the move on John Corbett as they head out of turn 4 on towards turn 5. Ciancetti darts to the inside, great move from the Italian. Can he pull it off? He pushes John Corbett offline. That's lovely from Marco Ciancetti. And it comes back to the point we're making at the start of the race about the agility of the Supersport class cars. And that bears out the point about how quickly the Spider goes in a straight line, blasting back past Marco Ciancetti. There's nothing else Ciancetti would have enjoyed that. But as they continue shadowbox in the early stages, Robinson is second in the Supersport class behind Ciancetti. The third Supersport runner is currently the 9th place car. That is Theodore Olsen. As again, Ciancetti tries to force John Corbett offline, then jinks the inside and he makes the move stick. Well done, Marco Ciancetti. He's now got about 4 corners before the Spider's going to be allowed to let rip once more. And to give you an indication of just how potent the Masters class cars are in a straight line, at Monza, which was the preceding round, we saw plenty of cars, well, really all of the Supersport field being lapped by the Masters class runners. Here, they're almost racing on a pass, such is the agility of the Radical SR3 RSX through the corners. As now, Ollie Hancock looks to try and line up the move on Theodore Olsen. This for third in the Supersport class. The blue and white car of Hancock right to the outside into the hairpin. He'll look for the switchback on Olsen as they squirt out of the hairpin. They have got John Caldwell then just behind them, as Olsen doesn't really know which way to go here. Is Hancock close enough to chance his arm into the first corner? Indeed he is. Looks to the inside, but Olsen able to use the radius. It's a very tight opening corner, not dissimilar to Redgate at Donington Park in terms of, you think the inside line might offer some joy, but the fact you're climbing uphill and it's a tight radius means that you need to be fully alongside to really make that look to the inside work out. So there's nothing doing for Theodore Olsen. Only Hancock behind him. Can't pick his way past, as now Olsen, having just caught up to the tail of Jim Booth, the American eases clear along the back straight on towards the hairpin. Seen in that notorious tangle getting on for almost 20 years ago between Michael Schumacher and Jacques Villeneuve, that decided the 1997 Formula 1 World Championship. And then on towards this brace of left-handers. Gently increases in speed. Race order is still Little John who leads it, from Kapadia, McLuhan and then Chris Hoy. This is one of the better battles that we've got on track at the moment between Theodore Olsen, Ollie Hancock and Jim Booth. It's the fight over 8th, 9th and 10th. And then just behind them, it's John Caldwell, Andrew Ferguson and Mark Crader. Stuart Mosley also will be on the cusp of carving through this group in a moment's time. Recovering from his first lap spin and contact. Again, Hancock looks like the move on Olsen, this time to the inside at the hairpin, and he should go through. Ollie Hancock, can he get it tightened for the apex? Yes, he can. And there was a sound of somebody's tyres squealing in the background there. We'll see if we've had a rotation in a moment or two. If it was, I rather suspect it was Andrew Ferguson, as Olsen comes back at Ollie Hancock, looks to challenge the inside at turn 1, pushes Hancock out wide, and this is going to give Olsen the inside line for turn 2, or will it? Hancock tries to fight round the outside. It's going to give him the inside line for the left-hander, which it does, and Hancock, after almost 3 corners side by side, is able to make their move. Andrew Ferguson was that spinner that we heard but didn't see, so he's been shuffled down into 14th. There you see at the very back of your picture the recovering car of Stuart Mosley. Olsen coming back immediately at Ollie Hancock, and as they battle, it's bringing John Caldwell into the fight as well. This is for the 3rd spot on the Supersport rostrum. Ciancetti, by the way, having made that move on John Corbett, is beginning to ease away from him. And has just set his personal best lap of the race, Marco Ciancetti, 1 minute 48.2. So Little John leads. He is 3.2 seconds up on Alex Kapadia, as Hancock looks to the inside of Jim Booth and saw that gap absolutely disappear, as suddenly John Caldwell in the fluorescent and black car joins in the fight as well. They're all bottled up behind Jim Booth. They're going to be caught in no time at all by Stuart Mosley. There is Mosley at the tail of the train. Great racing this in the relatively early stages of the first of 3 races this weekend Radical European Masters now. Mosley, he's got a championship to race for. He's going to look to the inside of John Caldwell. Caldwell looks to the inside of Theodore Olsen, which rather takes away Mosley's opportunity. Olsen's the black and orange car, Caldwell the black and yellow, Mosley the black and silver, and it is the black helmeted black and silver car of Stuart Mosley that draws alongside John Caldwell. As they climb uphill, Caldwell though breaks deep into turn 1. He might well run wide. He certainly leaves the door semi-open for Stuart Mosley. And Mosley sneaks past, takes the place, great move. Propels Mosley up to 5th in the Supersport class. His next 2 targets, Theodore Olsen and Ollie Hancock, immediately in front of him. There you see the rest of the classification. Marco Ciancetti not too far adrift, getting onto terms with Chris Hoy. But once success seconds, etc. are taken into account, Hoy and Kenny are still very much in the hunt of an outright race podium this afternoon. Hancock defends from Olsen. Mosley watches and waits. Sees which way Theodore Olsen's going to go. Now starts to put the Scandinavian driver under a little bit of pressure. Olsen just comes off line slightly into turn 8 at the left-hander. Oh, and then runs quite wide on the exit. As Hancock covers the inside line, he's learnt from last time that if you dart for that hole to the inside of Jim Booth, it will shut. It might well end expensively. But this is a wonderful scrap, one of the best outright dices we've had all year long. A puffer on the brakes from Theodore Olsen. And it's because Jim Booth is the cork in the bottle here. Through the corners, these Supersport class cars just that little bit quicker than the Spider. And then Booth has got the advantage in the straight line, as he proves once more. This time they think about 3 wide into the hairpin. It's Mosley who's going to be the winner, is he? He challenges the outside of Theodore Olsen. Olsen gives Mosley racing room, just about. And Stuart Mosley takes the place, moves up to 4th in the Supersport class. And that is good enough for 10th place overall. But for how long? Because Theodore Olsen challenges the inside of Stuart Mosley into turn 1. He pushes Mosley out wide, and Olsen's got the track position for turn 2. Mosley's going to break deep, try and tough it out around the outside, but he can't do it, so Olsen reclaims the position. Swing through turns 3 and 4. Turn 5, the next challenge. They've still got, as part of this group by the way, John Caldwell and Mark Crader. Down the back straight. Mosley consults his mirrors. Olsen consults his mirrors. Hancock certainly needs to consult his. He puts the car in the middle of the road. Olsen thinks about challenging Mosley. Looks to the outside of Theodore Olsen. But Olsen already a Radical champion this year. Again, gives Mosley the racing room, and Stuart Mosley should dart past. Mark Crader also looks to challenge John Caldwell with slightly less success. And now they get into the technical section. They immediately get onto terms with Jim Booth. Meanwhile, here's the fight for 4th and 5th between Chris Hoy and Marco Ciancetti. And it's much the battle we've just been enjoying a little bit further down the field. Hoyer's got the straight line advantage. And Marco Ciancetti doesn't, but he is quicker through the corners. Now, for those of you who've been following Radical Racing all season long, you might recognise at least partially the paint scheme on Chris Hoy's car. This is the car that has had success and podiums in the hands of Mike Cantillon earlier on in the season. So we know it's a Spider that works very well. It's been a very good start to this lap from Chris Hoy as well. It's really only the final third of the lap where we're seeing the Supersport cars hassling, as now Mosley looks like the move on Ollie Hancock, and Stuart Mosley's got the inside lines. They climb towards turn 1 and goes through. And Stuart Mosley, in the space of about 3 laps, has carved his way through this pack of cars. But the next challenge here for Stuart is to pick his way past Jim Booth and then try and chase down the 17 or so seconds on to James Robinson, who's 2nd in the Supersport class. Oh, that's a great move from Stuart Mosley to the inside at turn 5. Now, has he got enough of a buffer over Jim Booth to withstand the American straight line speed down the back straight? Wonderfully opportunistic, and Mosley knows if he can, he has to defend it. But Booth gets his nose in front. Mosley brakes desperately late, and Stuart Mosley somehow holds on to the place. That was absolutely wonderful driving from Stuart Mosley to take 8th position. And now is the window for Mosley to break clear of Jim Booth. Here is another look. He comes from miles back and just launches to the inside. And then on the brakes, absolutely on the limit of adhesion there from Stuart Mosley. That was quite wonderful stuff. So we've got 43.5 minutes left on the clock. We're approaching 1/3 race distance. That means the pit window isn't too far away from opening. Meanwhile, there's been a little bit of a sort out still behind Jim Booth. Ollie Hancock showing that his car can be the width of the Jerez circuit. Now, Chris Hoy, another driver who is going to have to dig deep into his wells of racing experience, has got Marco Ciancetti snapping at his heels. This is the fight for 4th and 5th. Hoy just moving around a little bit at the wheel of the Spider, but the car lasting well, not understeering too much on him, as he now will be able to break clear of Ciancetti down the back straight. Ciancetti, though, will close up surely under braking, but it's going to be through the next sequence of turns where the opportunity will present itself for the Italian. But he's got the twin challenge. First of all, the fact that Chris Hoy has been racing at a very high level all season, including the Le Mans 24 Hours. Secondly, the Spider is quick in the straight line. And thirdly, it's a pretty wide car as well. And therefore, as long as Hoy doesn't leave a gaping hole to the inside, there's not an awful lot the Italian's going to be able to do. But he closes up as they swing into turn 10 now. Replay, meanwhile, of John Caldwell and Mark Crader doing battle into turn 1. And Crader pushing a little bit too hard. Hello, gravel. Fortunately not. Hello, tyres. And Ciancetti's through past Hoy, so Marco Ciancetti goes 4th. But for how long? Chris Hoy draws alongside on the way to the hairpin. Ciancetti's going to tough it out to the inside. Clean exit, though, for Hoy. Should, it's a pretty big should, given the chance to blast past en route towards turn 1. And that's exactly what happens. So Hoy reclaims the position. Ciancetti has to think about where to challenge. Now, what we have seen, really, is the best way for the Supersport cars to get onto turns with the Masters cars is to do it through turn 5. Here is how it all happened. And it's just the agility of the SR3 through the chicane. And yet, Hoy saw he was coming. Didn't close the door. Knew he'd be able to fight back later on around the lap. And that's exactly what's happened. So this is one of the best races of the year so far in the Radical European Masters. Into turn 5 goes Ciancetti, who then raises his arm and waves Chris Hoy back through. And that's why the safety car is out. So Mark Crader, who's at the periphery of the gravel trap at turn 1, safety car is out now. This, with 6 minutes until the pit window opens, is a disaster for James Littlejohn and Alex Capardia, because they were leading by 15 seconds from Paddy McLuhan, 45 seconds from this battle we're watching between Chris Hoy and Marco Ciancetti. And the reason why it's a disaster, as Mark Crader gets strapped back in, is the way the success seconds will come into force. So without the opportunity for Capardia to build up a buffer, well, he's going to be in the pits 20 seconds longer than his rivals. Littlejohn and Wells 15 seconds. Harrison and McLuhan, they don't have any success seconds, and nor do Hoy and Kenny. So for Jason Kenny, when he takes over from Chris Hoy, there's every chance that he's going to be up into about 2nd position or thereabouts. So this could be very entertaining. Second half of the race with an eye towards the championship. Well, it's going to help, I would suggest, the chances here of Alos and Capardia to take a few points off Wells and Littlejohn. In the Supersport class, it is going to work pretty heavily against Maritiotto and Ciancetti, because Stuart Mosley and Riccardo Donio were due for 5 fewer seconds in the pits, and now Mosley's going to be in line on the road, almost behind Jamie Robinson, who's 2nd in the Supersport class. There is the recovery work that's ongoing. What they'll do, they'll pop that car back down. Mark Crader will jump in, fire it up and drive it back to the pits. So the safety car is out. We're at 1/3 race distance, and James Littlejohn leads the way. Here's another look at Crader's moment. And actually, it was well recovered as the car snapped to the left then. It, for a moment, looked as if he bought a one-way ticket to the tyre wall. But he was able to at least spin it around into the gravel trap. Bring the car to a halt. So James Littlejohn, having done absolutely everything perfectly, now sees that advantage whittled away behind the safety car. It's good news as well, with an eye towards the race victory, you'd suggest, for Paddy McLuhan and John Harrison. But the field bunch behind the safety car, and because of the advantages that have been built up, it's going to take a little while to bring them all to order. The leading trio all in the trade. Now, when the pit window opens, by the way, you won't see them coming in, if you're new to the championship, at 35 minutes on the bubble. They've got to go past the sign that says pit lane open, and then the pit lane is open until they go past the sign saying pit lane closed. Now, the lights are out on the safety car, so although they're not bunched up into an orderly file, they're going to be able to go racing once more, and that means for Littlejohn and Kapadia, the loss of ground isn't perhaps quite as significant as it might have been, because you can see now that Chris Hoy and Marco Cenchetti have only just got up to the tail of the field as around the hairpin. Littlejohn pulls the pin. He's going to take Kapadia with him for company. But also Paddy McLuhan in the mix. The fourth car in the queue is Andrew Ferguson, but he's already been into the pit lane and lost a number of laps into the bargain. Meanwhile, Marco Cenchetti is going to be jumped, or is he, by John Corbett? It's a real pity that we got the safety car when we did. That battle between Cenchetti and Chris Hoy was rather wonderful, but now Cenchetti has to get his defensive hat on, as just behind you saw Mosley looking to the inside of Jamie Robinson. That's about to watch for. It's the two cars running side by side towards the back of your picture. It's the white car of Jamie Robinson, the black car of Stuart Mosley, and Mosley has been the principal beneficiary of the safety car. It's allowed him to close that gap down to Jamie Robinson pretty much free of charge. Mosley, of course, who spun at the first corner of the race, I suspect after a little bit of assistance. So Stuart Mosley, fully focused, darts out of the toe behind Jamie Robinson, looks to the inside into the hairpin at turn 6, makes the move, goes second in the Supersport class. You can see his class rival Cenchetti disappearing on up the road. And Cenchetti will look to get back onto terms with Chris Hoy in fairly short order as well. 1.25 minutes till the pit lane open board goes out. So they'll go past it at the end of the next lap, and it'll be from the lap after that that they'll start to be ducking into the pits. We would expect that Stuart Mosley, who now challenges John Corbett, is going to stay out fairly deep into the pit window, as will Marco Cenchetti. At the front of the field, likewise, Littlejohn, Kapadia and McLuhan, we'd all anticipate will stay out until fairly deep into the pit window. Others might come in earlier. As around the hairpin on towards the back straight. Now here is John Caldwell attempting to go around the outside of Jim Booth with a limited level of success. Proves that Radical SR3 is a far better race car than it is Lawnmower. Rejoins the track. Probably has lost nothing more than quite a spike in blood pressure, as the next challenge here for Chris Hoy in fourth is the Lapri of Andrew Ferguson. Now this isn't ideal for Chris Hoy because he's got Cenchetti looming large on his tail. He's going to have the distraction of the slower car to put the lap on, as Ferguson a little bit hesitant through turn 5, and that's really smart driving from Andrew Ferguson. He moves aside, he waves Chris Hoy past. It's going to be slightly trickier here for Ferguson to allow Cenchetti to dart through, but he sees the agile Italian looking to the inside of the hairpin. So now we're back on for this fight for fourth. Cenchetti leads the Supersport class. There is Stuart Mosley at the back of your picture, who is second in the Supersport class. A little bit of dust being kicked up by somebody. So they went through turn 7 and 8, and it was Paddy McLuhan pushing very, very hard. McLuhan try and stay on terms with the race leader. Here he is, James Littlejohn. The pit window is open. Littlejohn will be made aware of that fact. He comes past the pit lane open board this time around, so he would have the option to pit in for the next lap. Look how hard McLuhan is pushing at the wheel of the bright orange 52 car. The car understeering its way out of the hairpin as he tries to stay with Capardi. Oh, I'm not sure all as it should be there for McLuhan, because you don't normally see an SR8 moving around that much unless the driver is absolutely wringing its neck, possibly really beyond the limit of what he should be doing. So Little John, 2.4 seconds clear of Capardia, trying to rebuild that buffer for Tony Wells to inherit. Capardia likewise wants to feed Manhals back into the race in the best possible position. McLuhan, he's got John Harrison waiting in the wings, and again the car just moving around underneath him. It's going to mean some fairly second-hand tyres, one would suggest, for John Harrison to take over. When McLuhan pits in, oh, I think something is possibly wrong with the car, because again it snaps away under braking. And McLuhan is too talented a driver to be making those sort of mistakes, the car moving that much without something not being quite as it ought. It's Paddy McLuhan. Again the car snaps out of line as he changes direction into turn 9. It just looks precarious corner upon corner. Be interesting to see whether or not McLuhan ducks into the pits now to effect the driver change, but also to give them a chance to inspect the car. Meanwhile, John Corbett back ahead of Stuart Mosley down the back straight. Stuart, though, has repassed John out of our sight, so he is back clear of him, as once more this huge battle amongst the Supersport runners is underway. Now the main change is into the pit lane, I can tell you, has come Paddy McLuhan. The main change is that Ollie Hancock is past Jamie Robinson, and Hancock also goes past John Corbett. Corbett darts towards the pits, as does Jamie Robinson. Theodore Olsen and Ollie Hancock continue on their way. There is McLuhan, jumps out of the car, turned over to John Harrison. I imagine a fairly extensive debrief underway given the problems they were having towards the end of the stint. Little John has got the luxury of several more laps if he wants them. Out of the car gets John Corbett. The reason for that is the drivers have got to vacate the cockpit before the refuelling can be undertaken. Here is another look at Stuart Mosley challenging John Corbett around the outside. And Mosley, of course, who has raced in the Le Mans 24 Hours, amongst other things, knows exactly what to extract from the car. Jumping into the cockpit of the 15 car is Jack Manchester. Manchester, a very promising young talent, who is being guided by Mark Blundell's management agency under the watchful eye this weekend of the former Formula Renault BARC star Kieran Clark. So Manchester will head back onto the circuit momentarily. So we've got a few cars that have come in. Also in is Andrew Ferguson. Hoy and Cencetti continuing their scrap. And again, Marco Cencetti will consider looking to like the move into the hairpin. He can't quite do it. And this has been a fine performance from Chris Hoy, and with John Corbett only now just venturing back onto the track after a very lengthy pit stop, or rather John Harrison venturing out. Oh, a spin from Chris Hoy, and Chris Hoy, just as it was looking so good, spins away his chances at turn 1, and there was a possibility there he might be able to get the car up onto the podium when he handed over to Jason Kenny, and instead he has a quick rotation. He gets back underway. He's lost about 15 seconds as a result of it. And it's very easy to do because these cars have got all the aerodynamic grip in the world until they've suddenly got none at all. Now, Theodore Olsen is in. That is to hand over to Jamie Constable. Constable, who unfortunately had a bit of a shunt in his Masters class car yesterday, which is why he's sharing with Theodore Olsen for the races. Now, Here is John Harrison. Fascinated to see how Harrison goes. He's got Cencchetti behind him, but after the adventures that Paddy McGluen was having just before he ducked into the pits, and again Harrison just having to take a couple of bites of the wheel into turn 8, runs out very wide does John Harrison, punches the car in a straight line towards turn 9. Cencchetti though sees a hole, goes for it. It's not a move for position, but the battle that we're going to watch for in the second half of the race is going to be that for third in the Masters class between John Corbett, John Harrison and Jason Kenny once he's taken over from Chris Hoy. It's just 3.5 minutes of the pit window open. James Littlejohn remains the race leader. Second is Capardia. Marco Cencchetti is now up to third, and he's in amongst the cars that have had their pit stops. Now, John Corbett in that black Spider, he is racing John Harrison for race position, so that could be a nice scrap to keep an eye on. Another very quick driver who has just entered the fray is Bradley Ellis, having taken over from John Caldwell. Ellis, former British GT champion, perennial front runner in Radical European Masters in recent seasons. There's Jim Booth. Jim, another driver who's had his pit stop, as Ollie Hancock spurts to a halt, jumps out of the 88 car that he will pass over to Mark Hignett. As Cencchetti and Corbett continue to do battle. Meanwhile, Chris Hoy is out of the number 11 car. Jason Kenny about to take over. Kenny's motor racing experience not quite as vast as that of Chris Hoy, as Harrison looks to challenge Cencchetti. Jason Kenny having done a few Radical races, also Ginetta racing as well in the Ginetta G40 in the GT5 Championship, where he was excellent Alton Park a couple of years ago. So he slots in to the cockpit of the number 11 car, which would appear to have had a little bit of a conflagration towards the rear. He continues to get strapped in. A frustrated Hoy watches on. Now this is proving to be a reasonably lengthy pit stop for Kenny, because these are the cars that he was hoping to be fed out in front of: Corbett, Cencchetti and Harrison. Marco Cencchetti all over the tail of John Corbett. As Corbett moves across, snatches the apex. Jason Kenny emerges, so here comes Jason Kenny. Whatever the issue was, he's back into the frame with a good advantage over John Corbett. So Jason Kenny, once this is shaken out, is going to be third in the race overall, with John Corbett and John Harrison trying to chase him down. So this could be a fantastic finale in the Supersport class, by the way. Cencchetti yet to pit in, as is Stuart Mosley, so we've still got the race a little bit in flux, but all of our race leaders, they've got to pit in at the end of this lap. There's less than a minute left in the pit window. Littlejohn and Capardia, they're 30 seconds up the road. They might sneak another lap, as Harrison tried to commit to the move on Corbett, as they fight for fourth. And then Cencchetti, bobbing and weaving, third overall, leads the Supersport class. And it's got Stuart Mosley homing in on his tail. 25.5 minutes remain. This has been one of the best races we've had so far this year in the Radical European Masters. Some wonderful scrapping going on through the field. And we've got an intriguing finale, because Littlejohn and Capardia, when they hand over to Wells and Allos, got the championship at stake. We've got the Supersport Championship at stake as well. We've got a lot of very quick Masters cars introduced to that third spot on the podium, as Harrison gets the run here on John Corbett. This is a move that should be executed by John Harrison. He slides to the inside of John Corbett. It had been several laps in the making, as Stuart Mosley also looks like the move on Marco Cencchetti to take the lead of the Supersport class, admittedly, as both cars have to go into the pits, and Mosley tries to elbow out Cencchetti, so pride for Stuart Mosley. He leads the Supersport class as they both peel into the pit lane. Now Jason Kenny's advantage over John Harrison is the gap to watch for, and it's about 7 seconds. Capardia is in to pass over to Manhal Allos. So for Jason Kenny, this is a fairly substantial step up in power, having previously raced Radical SR3 and then the Ginetta G40, which, although very sprightly, not quite as powerful. Meanwhile, Cenchetti and Maratiotto continue their pit stop. And Maratiotto, I think, forgot his seat insert, runs, gets it, jumps in. Now, if you're new to watching the Radical European Masters, but you know the name of Marcello Maratiotto, he was the driver who was involved in that absolutely horrendous accident at Spa-Francorchamps a couple of years ago, which became, as is the way these days, something of a social media sensation. And as a result, Mrs. Maratiotto said, well, you're not racing the SR8 anymore, but he's allowed out to play in the SR3. Into the pit lane comes James Littlejohn from the lead of the race, which he has held throughout to pass over to Tony Wells. And once all the pit stops have been shuffled through, we'll be able to give you a definitive order as Alos rejoins into clear air. So Alos is going to be either second, well, once success seconds work through, he is going to be second in the race behind Tony Wells, barring a disastrous pit stop. With then, for my money, it's going to be one of the Supersport class cars, I think, next up. And the third Masters class car is going to be that of Jason Kenny. There is Kenny now. And yeah, he's got Bradley Ellis up the road ahead of him. Also Jamie Constable and Mark Hignett, all a little bit of a wobble through turn one. The car just didn't quite want to bite. Came in a little bit hot. Heads out of turn two into the left-hander at turn three. Curve's got such a low profile. He's got Jack Manchester behind him. Now Manchester is going to be fourth or fifth in the Supersport class once this has all shuffled through. It's turn five for Kenny, but he can now wind up the pace onto the back straight. This is where the Spider really looks to fly. Lovely shot there into the visor, fully focused on the job ahead. But here is Manhal Alos coming towards the end of his outlap. Tony Wells yet to be signalled as being out of the pits, having taken over from James Littlejohn. In fact, he is now. So Wells emerges as the race leader and with a reasonably comfortable buffer here for Tony Wells. He's going to have the length of the start and finish straight over Manhal Alos. It means that if things stay as they are, Wells and Littlejohn will see their Masters Championship lead grow by another 5 points, out to a 34-point advantage. But Manhal, when he's got the bit between his teeth, like that, he is either very quick and spectacular, or he is somebody who gets to spend part of the race sitting alongside the marshals. He has had his way with moments in years gone by, but teaming up with Alex Capadia this season has really proved a masterstroke in terms of putting together a consistent championship challenge. James Littlejohn rehydrates. Job done for James. And now, what can Tony Wells do? His advantage over Alos was 19.1 seconds as he emerged from the pits. It is down to 15.2 seconds through sector one. So 20 minutes Manhal to overhaul 15-second deficit. That means that Manhal can be about 1.4 seconds lap quicker than Tony Wells. It could be on here. Third place in the race overall is Marcello Maratiotto. Fourth is Mark Hignett. Fifth is Jamie Constable. Sixth, Ricardo Dona. Seventh, Bradley Ellis. And eighth is Jason Kenny. But Kenny is the third of the Masters class runners. The Supersport podium is currently Maratiotto, Hignett and Constable. So that's the way it is with 20 minutes remaining. So plenty of intrigue to watch for. Tony Wells has continued to hemorrhage time over the course of this lap. Now here is the fight for second in the Supersport class, and it's Constable who's moved up ahead of Mark Hignett. And behind them, Ricardo Dona is the driver who really needs to put together the spurt here to try and chase down the 10-second deficit from this group to Marcello Maratiotto. And well, we thought there was going to be a degree of parity between the Supersport and Masters class cars. The fact that we've had that safety car period just prior to the pit stops that's bunched them all up with the shorter pit stops for the Supersport runners as they don't need to refuel has given us a very different complexion on the field heading in to this second half of the race. So this is the battle for 4th overall. Somewhere adrift of the race leaders, of course. What I can say as well is that Jason Kenny in 8th, who is 25 seconds back from Marcello Marchiotto, is catching all of these cars in the Masters class car at a rate of at least a second a lap. So this is far from settled. We've also got John Harrison as well in 10th, who is fractionally quicker as well than Jason Kenny. So we could yet see a Masters car 3rd on the rostrum, but it's going to take quite the charge over the next 18 minutes. Mark Hignett and Ricardo Dona, meanwhile, continuing to scrap for 5th and 6th. 18.25 minutes to run. Ricardo Dona just using all the aerodynamic grip available to him at the wheel of the SR3 RSX. Tries to get to turns with Mark Hignett. Hignett defends into the chicane. Does he get the car squared off in time? Yes, he does. And Ricardo Dona also backs right out of that move. Realises it's not worth pursuing. The gap at the front of the field between Wells and Alos comes down further still. It's 12.5 seconds now. Matt Alos at this rate of capture is on for getting the jump on Tony Wells between now and the checkered flag. Let's just hope that we don't have a secondary safety car period. 3rd place is Marcello Marchiotto. 4th is Jamie Constable, and this group of cars all losing ground to Marchiotto. So 4th is Constable, 5th is Hignett, 6th Dona, 7th Ellis. In 8th it's Kenny, 9th Manchester, 10th Harrison, 11th is Corbett, as Dona makes the move on Mark Hignett. So Ricardo Dona, another place gained, up into 5th. And now he's released into a little bit of clear air. Let's see what Ricardo Dona can do. Around the right-hander, picking up the throttle onto the back straight. This is really the only point on the circuit where he can pause. Hignett looks in his mirrors, realises there's nobody behind him. Jamie Constable, who we're much more accustomed to seeing at the wheel of the RSX Spider, but also, of course, historic Formula 1 cars. Constable, like James Littlejohn, a very accomplished historic F1 racer. Now, 2nd in the Supersport class. They're all losing plenty of time to Marcello Marchiotto, who leads the Supersport class. Meanwhile, Tony Wells has just come past us with a 1:50.1, waiting for Manhal Alos to flash past the commentary position, which he does, 1:49.7. So Alos, 9/10 quicker than Wells. He brings the gap down to 11.6 seconds. This could get very interesting late on for the race victory. The other battle that's worth watching for is the one for 8th place between Kenny, Manchester and Harrison, because they're only separated by a couple of seconds midway through the lap. And they're all reeling in this group of cars as well. There is Bradley Ellis, who has closed down that ground remarkably over the last lap or so. Ellis, 1:51.1, but it compares to 1:54 for Mark Hignett. And then Kenny's flashed through only a few seconds behind that. Again, substantially quicker, with Manchester and Harrison just behind. So all this gaggle of cars really fighting over 6th place. They're about to converge on Mark Hignett. Hignett in the blue car. Can see Ricardo Dona driving away from him. There is Ellis. There in the background you see Kenny. There's a little bit of a buffer, 3 seconds or so back to Manchester and Harrison. Front of the field, Alos still continues to chip away at Tony Wells. The gap down to a fraction over 11 seconds as they came out of sector 2. Now is Harrison close enough to light the move on Jack Manchester? No, he's not. And this is the opportunity for Manchester to then streak away from John Harrison through the technical section of the circuit. Harrison again gets that orange car moving underneath him. I suspect that he and Paddy McLuhan have gambled on a slightly lower downforce setup that is making life fairly hectic for the pair of them. We've still got a quarter of the race to run. Wells has actually extended his lead over Alos on that last lap. Alos making a mistake somewhere in the final sector. He lost about 0.6 of a second. Maritiotto secure in third. We're watching the battle for 9th and 10th between Jack Manchester and John Harrison. You can see how much ground Manchester gained on Harrison through the technical section of the track. This group of cars, they're all chasing Mark Hignett, who has been passed by Bradley Ellis. So Ellis goes 6th, Hignett to 7th. Kenny stays in 8th from Manchester and Harrison. Again, John Harrison looks to the inside of Jack Manchester. Again, he just doesn't quite have enough time to overhaul the youngster. And really, all of these cars are still at the pace they're currently running, catching Jamie Constable in 4th position. So that's the prize they're looking for. 3rd place of Maritiotto would seem to be ever so slightly out of range. Now here's Tony Wells, the race leader, who has once more, for the second lap in succession, just been able to elevate his pace to match, if not exceed, that of Manhal Alos. And Tony Wells and James Littlejohn, until Monza, they had one of those seasons where all the luck had gone in their favour, but the 3 races at Monza were just a rather troublesome weekend. They gave away a hatful of points to Manhal Alos. That's a good lap from Wells, a 1 minute 49.5 as he completes his 25th lap. And he already arrives into turn 2 as Manhalos comes past now, 13 seconds back. So it's a much slower lap from Manhalos, a 1 minute 50.9. In fact, it begs the question whether or not Manhal has got a little bit of a problem emerging at the wheel of the 51 car, whether or not he's just through the best of the tyres, or whether it's something slightly more sinister. Because that last lap he gave away a second to Marcello Maritiotto in 3rd place, who's chasing him down. But we always knew that an hour around this Jerez circuit was going to push the tyres to the limits of their endurance. And again, the 61 car just moving around too much for Alice's liking. He comes offline. There's certainly something he doesn't think is quite right. Oh, and he almost spins it up as he comes out of the hairpin. And certainly the power and grip equation is beginning to slide pretty decisively in favour of power for Manhalos. Here is Maritiotto, leads the Supersport class, comfortable in 3rd, and a victory in this race for Maritiotto and Chen Chetty will mean that they could take the overall Radical European Masters and Supersport Championships in the second race of the weekend. Now here is the battle for 4th, and it's coming together. Constable has been caught by Ellis, and Ellis has got Donor behind him, and then it's Jason Kenny with them. And here is how Ellis got past Ricardo Donor, slithering wide across the grass there for Donor. Donor, the front splitter, full of grass. Trying to come back at Bradley Ellis and Jamie Constable. And then Jason Kenny closing onto their tail as well. Now what can Jamie Constable do about keeping Bradley Ellis behind him? Ellis has been one of the quickest drivers in the Supersport class for several seasons now, the Radical European Masters, but Jamie Constable is not going to be flustered, but Ellis pulls the pin, launches around the outside towards the hairpin. That's a beautifully judged move from Bradley Ellis. Finds the grip, finds the momentum, makes it past with 10 minutes to run. Meanwhile, the to and fro between Tony Wells and Manhalos continues. This time around it was Wells who had the slower lap. Another look at that move from Bradley Ellis. Constable covered the inside line. Ellis drew alongside, came off the brakes and just swept around. Full confidence in how much grip was available to him. So Jamie Constable demoted to 5th. Donor is there in 6th. Kenny in 7th is closing onto their tail as well. Jason Kenny currently en route for a Masters class podium. 5th in the race overall, could also be on the cards. But because he's already catching Ricardo Donor. Might go for the move here, Jason Kenny. Not quite close enough to Donor on that occasion, but surely maybe down the start and finish straight. It's the spider at the back of your picture. There it is. Then there's the gap behind to Mark Hignett, Jack Manchester and John Harrison. Tony Wells flashes through, completes his 27th lap. A 1 minute 49.9 for Wells. So 1 minute 49.8 for Alos. So the fight at the front of the pack is relatively settled as Jack Manchester looks to challenge to the outside of Mark Hignett. Hignett defends robustly. No way through there for Manchester. Spin at turn one, fortunately not getting as far as the gravel. Now this was Jamie Constable policing the track somewhat. And by that point, Donor was pretty much committed. Race leader Tony Wells leads by 12.9 seconds over Manhal Alos. 6.5 minutes to run. Again, Tony just fully focused on the job ahead. Navigates the hairpin, doesn't need to bring the neck of the car. He knows there's no risk to the lead unless something were to go fairly spectacularly wrong. Second place Manhal's the same. It's a further 13 seconds back then to Marcello Marottiotto in third. Now this is Mark Hignett having a big moment into the chicane, snatching the brakes fairly spectacularly. That would be just the thing to ruin Tony Wells' afternoon, would be the field being bunched up behind the safety car, because the safety car really changed the complexion of the race. The timing of it, such as it was, so close to the pit stops, hasn't affected the result at the very front of the field, but certainly has given the Supersport class cars the chance to challenge for the outright rostrum. Meanwhile, John Harrison has finally got the opportunity to draw alongside Jack Manchester further down the order as Ricardo Donor has made the move stick on Jamie Constable, as Manchester and Harrison run side by side into turn 7. Manchester around the outside of John Harrison. Maximum commitment from Jack Manchester, beautifully pulled off. And Harrison again thwarted in his efforts to move any higher than 9th. Meanwhile, Jason Kenny has crossed the start and finish line clear of Bradley Ellis, so Kenny is up into 4th place now. Ellis slips to 5th, 2nd in the Supersport class. There you just see the glimpse of that fight for 4th and 5th. Wells and Alos into their 29th lap, 4.5 minutes to run. The final spot on the Supersport podium still slightly up for grabs. Ricardo Donor has now moved clear of Jamie Constable. John Harrison again has the opportunity to challenge Jack Manchester. This time surely it's the definitive pass as he covers the line into turn 1. Manchester, though, just a little bit smoother on the exit, but Harrison covers the inside line for turn 2. If he doesn't understeer out wide, there's nothing that Manchester can do to fight back, and that's exactly what happens. John Harrison's next target is Jamie Constable. Now, we've already seen that Jamie is a difficult man to find a way past. But Harrison's car seems to be coming on very strong late in the race. He's very confident with just how aggressive he can be, flinging it about. And he carries a lot of speed coming out of turn 5 in a straight line. Should be able to punch past Constable. That's exactly what happens. Don't forget Harrison, of course, running in the Masters class SR8. Has a big wiggle coming out the hairpin. Harrison, though, up into 7th place. His next target being Ricardo Donor. Manchester also now looking to challenge Jamie Constable. Jack Manchester looks to the inside of the Constable, and Jamie realises the game is up, has to leave the door open. Manchester snatches 4th in the Supersport class as a result. The race leaders into their 31st lap. They're going to have time probably for just one more by the time they get round into of this tour, as Harrison looks to the inside of Ricardo Dona. Went in very, very deep and late there, John Harrison. That was always unlikely to end in the move being completed successfully. Instead, he can ease past Dona en route towards turn 1. And John Harrison, he might fancy his chances of chasing down Bradley Ellis as well. I think that is verging on the slight, somewhat unlikely. Now this is really interesting with an eye towards the races tomorrow, is that the Masters class cars, having had a wobble sort of at 3/4 distance, now coming on really strong in that stage of the race. Here is Jason Kenny in 4th, 3rd Masters class runner, and he and Chris Hoy, well, but for that spin, one wonders if they'd have been in a position to challenge for the overall race podium. As it is, they're going to get onto the Masters class roster, and with there being less than a lap time in the race, it means that Tony Wells has embarked on the final lap. Wells leads 9.5 seconds advantage over Manhal Alos. Barring an absolute disaster for Tony Wells, that's not going to be chased down. So for Tony Wells and James Littlejohn, it will build their buffer at the front of the Masters class out to 34 points. Don't forget, they need to be more than 40 points clear at the checker flag at the end of race 2, not to take it through to the deciding race of the season. Down the back straight for Tony Wells. It's on the cusp of putting the lap on Jim Booth. Jim, who really has faded as the race has unfolded, currently down in 12th place. As Wells swings into turn 7. The latter stage of what's been one of the most enjoyable races we've had so far this year in the Radical European Masters. Some brilliant dicing all the way through the field, and the championship very nicely poised, because it's far from a knockout blow in favour of Wells and Littlejohn. They've done all they could do in this race, but they've got to hope that nothing goes wrong in the remaining 2 races in order to seal the title ahead of Manhal Alos and Alex Kapadia. A little bit of trim hanging loose on Tony Wells' car, but it's not going to be any concern, because he heads into the final corner now around the hairpin. The checker flag is ready and waiting. It's going to be victory in the first of 3 races in the Radical European Masters in Jerez for Tony Wells and James Littlejohn. They take the win, and the checkered flag. 2nd place to Manhal Alos and Alex Kapadia. 3rd, and the Supersport victory set for Marcello Maratiotto and Marco Ciancetti. Great drive from the pair of them, and it's one that puts them within touching distance of winning the overall title in the first of tomorrow's races. Maratiotto celebrates as he crosses the line, and then a few corners to navigate for 4th for Jason Kenny and Chris Hoy. It's just the hairpin to go now for Kenny. Really good performance this. As he runs around the hairpin, accelerates through, takes the checker flag. So 4th place to Jason Kenny and Chris Hoy, to the applause of the mechanics on the pit wall. And 5th, 2nd in the Supersport class for John Corbell and Bradley Ellis. 6th to John Harrison and Paddy McLuhan, and 7th place for Ricardo Dona and Stuart Mosley. They complete the Supersport podium ahead of Manchester and Robinson, and then Constable and Olsen. Well, don't forget, 2 more races to come this weekend for the Radical European Masters. The first of them, the race gets underway at 10:40 European time tomorrow, so our coverage will start about 10 minutes before that. Of course, if you're watching in the UK, it starts an hour earlier at 9:40, and then the 3rd and deciding race of the Radical European Masters Championship gets underway at 2:45 local time tomorrow here in Jerez. But for now, it's Tony Wells and James Littlejohn who can celebrate. They have scored the first victory after a busy race, an ill-timed safety car for them, but nonetheless, Wells and Littlejohn have got their heads down and been able to drive clear at the front of the field. Let's have a look then at the final classification. So victory for Wells and Littlejohn. Runners-up, Alison Kapadia. Supersport winners in 3rd for Maratiotto and Ciancetti. Great drive from Chris Hoy and Jason Kenny to 4th. John Corbell and Bradley Ellis, another superb performance. They take 5th and 2nd in the Supersport class, ahead of Harrison McLuhan. Ricardo Donor and Stuart Mosley complete the Supersport class after a brilliant recovery drive from Mosley after the first corner spin. Manchester and Robinson in 8th from Olsen and Constable. John Corbett completes the top 10 ahead of Hignett and Hancock, and then Jim Booth in 12th with a disappointment for Mark Crader. He spun at about 40% race distance, which brought out the safety car. So an excellent start to the weekend in the Radical European Masters, as Tony Wells comes to a halt in the pit lane to celebrate. Just needs to find somewhere a little bit safer to park. Alos jumps out of the 61 car. Really interesting how Alos came on very strong again in the last couple of laps, but had that period where the pace went away from him and the car was moving about all over the place. Nonetheless, he and Alex Kapadia, if things go their way and bad luck befall others, could still claim the title tomorrow. Handshake from James Littlejohn to Tony Wells, as delighted Wells unhooks himself from the cockpit and goes to confer with Littlejohn. So let's take a look back at the best of the race then, and off the line it was Littlejohn who got the jump from Kapadia, but Alex made it very tight into the first corner with Paddy McLuhan challenging for 3rd, but it was Hoy who swept around the outside as Stuart Mosley rotated, pushing just a little bit too hard. The early stages were characterised by some brilliant dicing between the Supersport class runners, bottled up behind some of the slower Masters class cars. It meant that we were 3 wide on occasion. Ollie Hancock was one of several drivers looking to try and carve up through the field. Meanwhile, Marco Ciancetti and John Corbett enjoyed a battle royale, which eventually sprung Ciancetti to hair off up the road, as Theodore Olsen and Ollie Hancock traded places lap after lap. Also showing brightly was John Caldwell, as did Stuart Mosley, recovering from his first corner spin. Mark Crader then had this moment, under pressure from Caldwell, beached in the gravel trap and brought out the safety car. And that safety car coming just before the pit stops. It did, though, release Stuart Mosley to pull off a spectacular move on John Corbett. Post pit stops, and Ricardo Donor was trying to force his way up through the field, elbowing aside Mark Hignett. Meanwhile, Bradley Ellis was the man on the move around the outside of Jamie Constable. Was at the front of the field. Tony Wells led the way from Manhal Alos. Ricardo Donor is next to try and find a way past Constable, meeting with some fairly stout defence. So it was victory for Tony Wells and James Littlejohn, building their buffer at the top of the Masters Class Championship. So it's goodbye from Ben Evans in Jerez. We will see you tomorrow for the conclusion of the Radical European Masters Championship.
Estamos todavía aquí viendo los fotos. Nosotros todavía estamos aquí viendo los fotos.